It was the sound of seagulls that woke her. Faint and shrill, they echoed as if through a long tunnel. Emily Lane stirred, her hand fluttering against warm bedsheets, not the scratchy hospital blanket she remembered from her last moments. Her breath hitched. There was a scent in the air, sun-dried cotton, beeswax polish and lilacs. The scent of her childhood home. She sat up slowly, the soft whisper of her nightgown startling her. Her fingers, once gnarled by age and arthritis, were smooth again. Young. A mirror across the room confirmed what she felt but could not yet believe. The reflection staring back at her was not the 62-year-old woman who'd just said goodbye to the world, but a girl of no more than 20. She stumbled from bed, cold rushing to her bare feet against the wooden floor. Outside the window, golden autumn leaves danced on the breeze, and the familiar sight of the Lane estate, her family's historic Georgian manor, sat timeless against the horizon. Emily pressed her palm to the glass. Her pulse raced in her wrist. He was back. The first time Emily Lane had died, she thought it would be the end. It had been peaceful in a way. Ryan Carter, her husband of nearly 40 years, had held her hand. She had drifted off in his arms, watching the sun dip behind the trees outside their assisted living home. "Emily," he had whispered, his voice raspy but steady. "Even if I could do it all again, I would still choose you." She had believed him. Back then. But time was a cruel teacher and death, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Now, standing barefoot in the past, Emily was faced with the truth she hadn't dared admit even at the end. Ryan Carter had never truly loved her. Not in the way she had loved him. Not in the way she had sacrificed for him. She had followed him to the southern coast, to a forgotten military outpost, far from the bustling cities and the dreams she once held. She had given up her engineering scholarship, ignored her professor's warnings, and left behind every hope of a career to become the good military wife. They'd had a son and a daughter. They'd lived simply, even happily, for years. But under the surface, cracks had always lingered. Ryan had ambition in his bones. She had seen it, dimly, even when she was young. In the way he looked at the map of his career, not the family portrait. In the long silences when he thought she wasn't watching. In the night he got drunk with his fellow officers and called her Plan B. It hadn't been malice. Ryan wasn't cruel. He simply never loved her the way she needed to be loved. And now, God or fate or something between had given her this impossible second chance. At first she tried to convince herself to forget it all. Maybe she'd made it up. Maybe it was a dream or madness, or some desperate longing to redo the pain of a wasted life. But the more she paid attention, the more pieces fell into place. The date on the newspaper was unmistakable. September 14, 1954. 7 years before she and Ryan were married. 6 years before she followed him to the outpost. 3 years before she gave up on herself. In this timeline, Ryan was still in the Westbridge Military Academy. They hadn't even met yet. 3 days passed before she saw him again. Her father, Charles Lane, returned from a meeting with high-ranking officials and brought news that Westbridge Academy would be hosting a social mixer for distinguished young officers and eligible daughters from society families. Emily's name was already on the guest list. "I heard young Carter is on the invitation," her Aunt Meredith whispered over dinner, eyeing her with interest. "Tall, decorated, good jawline. The Academy's top graduate last year. People say he's destined for general." Emily didn't answer. She knew exactly who Ryan Carter was, and who he would become. That night she stared at the ceiling in her canopy bed, her mind racing. She hadn't met him yet in this life. But the idea of changing her fate, that maybe she could avoid everything or confirm whether it had ever been real, consumed her. He had to go to the mixer. If only to see. The Westbridge Military Hall was polished to perfection. Marble floors, long banquet tables, glimmering chandeliers. It was the kind of event that existed somewhere between a debutante ball and a military strategy session. Men in uniform mixed with young women in satin gloves and pearls. The music was soft, orchestral, rehearsed. Emily wore a pale blue gown, vintage by today's standards but timeless in the 1950s. Her mother's necklace sat at her collarbone, a whisper of elegance. She looked calm, poised, every bit the Lane family daughter. But inside her heart raced. She searched the crowd, scanning for his face. It had been decades, technically 2 lives, but she knew him. Knew the line of his shoulders, the firmness of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned a room like a battlefield. And then, she saw him. Ryan Carter. In full uniform. Crisp, dark polished shoes. Metals glinting under the chandelier light. He moved through the crowd with quiet purpose, offering polite greetings. Women glanced his way. A few whispered. Then he turned. His eyes passed over her. There was no recognition, of course. Not yet. Emily held her breath. And then, he walked right past her. To the woman at her side. "Miss Johnson," he said, voice smooth. "Nora. These are for you." He held out a bouquet of sunflowers. Emily's stomach turned. Nora Johnson, flawless, graceful, freshly returned from a scholarship in Moscow, blushed and took the flowers with both hands. "Captain Carter, you remembered." "I never forget," Ryan said softly. "Would you allow me the honor of sitting beside you tonight?" Laughter rippled around them. Friends teased. Cameras flashed. Emily stood frozen. Sunflowers. In her past life, Ryan had grown them in their yard. His favorite flower, he said, because they were strong and loyal, always facing the sun. He said they reminded him of her. But they'd never been for her. Not really. She left quietly, stepping away from the laughter and the candlelight. Outside, the night air was cool, crisp with autumn. She leaned against the stone column and drew in a breath that trembled at the edges. It was confirmation. Clear and cold. In her first life, she'd clung to an illusion. A marriage held together by duty, guilt, and her unwavering love. But Ryan Carter had never chosen her. He had been forced. After rumors spread about a rescue near the river, he saved her from falling, and society whispered that they must be in love. Her father had encouraged the match. Ryan, unwilling to create scandal, had agreed. Not out of love. Out of obligation. Emily returned home that night with no tears left to cry. Her parents asked about the event. Her aunt offered to call the Carter family for a proper introduction. She shook her head and smiled politely. "I'm not interested in marrying just anyone," she said. "Not anymore." "Then what are you going to do?" her father asked gently. She lifted her chin. "I'm going to finish what I started." She dug through old letters, scholarship offers, engineering notebooks. The University of Chicago had offered her a place in its advanced mechanical and chemical engineering program years ago. She had turned it down when she got engaged. Now she wrote back with interest. She sent letters to the National Institute for Industrial Research. And she retrieved a telegram she had once drafted but never mailed. To Northwest Research Center. Subject: Reapplication for Project Engineering Post. From Emily Grace Lane. Message: Ready to serve. Please advise next steps. She signed it, folded it, and pressed it flat. This time she would not wait for anyone to choose her. She would choose herself. Autumn leaves tumbled along the sidewalk as Emily Lane stepped out of the telegram office. Her leather gloves clutched her bag tightly, and a small receipt fluttered in the breeze behind her. A simple slip of paper carrying more weight than anything else she'd done in 2 lifetimes. The message had been sent. To the Northwest Research Center. Her second life was officially underway. But despite the firm set of her jaw and the clarity in her eyes, her chest still carried the weight of what she had witnessed only 2 nights earlier. Ryan Carter presenting sunflowers to Nora Johnson. Her heart had squeezed when the petals brushed her arm, only to pass her by and land in Nora's hands. She had stood motionless, frozen, watching him offer a smile to someone else. The same smile that, in another life, she had thought was hers alone. Back then she had believed in fate. She had believed in sacrifice. Now she knew better. Love should never require self-erasure. Later that week, Emily's parents invited a string of eligible bachelors to tea, hoping to distract her from what they presumed was a temporary heartbreak. She sat with perfect posture, her face serene, her replies practiced. To anyone observing, she looked like the ideal debutante, graceful, educated, modest. But inside, her patience was razor-thin. "Emily, darling," her Aunt Meredith said sweetly, "what kind of man are you even looking for? Look around. Every gentleman here is either military or comes from an impeccable family." Emily sipped her tea. "Then they'll find matches soon enough." A few men tried to charm her with clever remarks about politics or international news. One even dared to quote a line of poetry. But Emily's thoughts drifted elsewhere, to turbine pressure calculations, to pipeline models, to the half-finished chemical equations in her notebook. Let them talk. He had work to do. Despite the sting from the mixer, Emily found herself unable to forget Ryan entirely. That perhaps was the cruelest part of being reborn. Memory clung with hooks. She remembered the way he had held her in winter, the way he fanned her through hot summers, the quiet jokes they'd shared over boiled potatoes in that crumbling kitchen. Were those moments real? Or had she projected her devotion onto a man who never asked for it? In this life she wanted answers. So when she learned that Ryan would be helping with logistics at the military hospital, where she had recently begun volunteering, she did not change her shift schedule. She would see him. She needed to. And sure enough, 3 days later she spotted him walking across the courtyard, Nora limping beside him. Her ankle twisted slightly, supported by his strong arm. Emily froze at the edge of the hallway. She had seen that touch before, his hand just under her elbow, gentle yet firm. 100 tiny memories collided in her chest. Nora winced as they entered the clinic. Ryan looked up and their eyes met. A flicker of something passed over his face. Recognition, surprise. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the calm, composed expression of a seasoned officer. "You," he said. "Nurse." This patient twisted her ankle. Emily kept her face hidden behind her surgical mask. "I see. Please have her sit." She knelt before Nora, examining the swelling with steady fingers. It was mild. Nothing more than a minor sprain. "You'll be fine," she said evenly. "A cold compress and rest should do it." Ryan's voice snapped out, sharp and cold. "That's it? That seems careless. Mississippi Lane, you should prescribe something for the swelling." "There's no need for medication," she replied, standing. "It's not severe." But Ryan stepped closer. Too close. His voice dropped to a biting tone. "Still acting like the privileged little princess, I see. Too proud to get your hands dirty? This isn't your family's drawing room. This is a medical facility. Try acting like you belong." The words hit like frostbite. Emily inhaled slowly, suppressing the anger rising in her chest. In her past life, Ryan had spoken to her with gentleness, even when he was frustrated. But this version of him was sharper. Arrogant. "Captain Carter," she said coolly. "My work speaks for itself. Please don't let your concern for Miss Johnson cloud your judgment." Ryan's eyes narrowed, but before he could reply, Nora tugged gently at his sleeve. "Ryan, please, let's not make a scene." Reluctantly he stepped back. Emily turned and left without another word, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The next morning, Emily received a letter from the Northwest Research Center. Her application had been received and provisionally accepted. Further review would take place after a technical demonstration at the upcoming joint conference between the Ministry of Industry and Westbridge Academy. A familiar twist gripped her chest. In her past life, that exact event had served as a turning point, not for her but for Ryan. Back then he had submitted her research under his name, using outdated drafts she'd left behind. The papers had catapulted him to early promotion. She had never even attended the event. She'd been home preparing dinner. Not this time. She retrieved her old notes, refreshed her technical knowledge, and wrote a paper on chemical refinement for large-scale industrial development. She worked through nights, diagramming oil extraction models and pressure valve mechanics. Equations flowed faster than memories now. This was her battlefield. The day of the conference arrived with crisp blue skies and tight-lipped anticipation. Emily arrived early. Her hair was tied neatly, her slate gray blouse tucked into a wool skirt, practical but dignified. Around her, men in suits and cadets in uniform whispered and pointed toward the tall exhibition board at the front of the room. Ryan's paper sat at the top. Chemical optimization models for Shaanxi industrial zones, submitted by Captain Ryan Carter. Emily stepped closer. Her throat tightened. The language was cleaner, more confident. But it was unmistakably hers. The structural diagrams, the procedural layout, they were based on a research paper she had started years ago but never published. He had refined it, updated it, but it was still hers. A judge approached, holding her own submission, frowning. "Strange," he muttered. "This report is nearly identical to Captain Carter's." People turned. Emily felt their gazes like heat. "Is this plagiarism?" someone asked aloud. Ryan stepped forward, expression composed. I wrote my report based on a foreign technical journal I read while abroad. Any similarities are coincidental. A smirk played on his lips. Emily met his eyes. And smiled. I didn't plagiarize, she said calmly. But I'm happy to prove it. She turned to the blackboard behind her and picked up a piece of chalk. The room quieted as her hand moved with precision, outlining chemical theory, pressure equations, conversion models, energy loss differentials. Formula after formula. She didn't just defend her work. She taught it. By the time she reached the final derivation, even the older judges leaned in, watching with open admiration. Mr. Richard Lynn, the most respected expert present, stepped forward. Miss Lane, this was remarkable. The audience began to murmur again. People glanced at Ryan, whose jaw had tightened visibly. I believe, Mr. Lynn continued, you may have just solved two of our biggest bottlenecks in compound distribution. Applause rippled through the room. Emily bowed her head slightly, then turned away. Ryan stood frozen, his victory evaporating beneath the weight of her brilliance. That evening, as the judges finalized their decisions, Emily was pulled aside. Mississippi Lane, said one official, handing her a sealed envelope. We'd like to extend you a formal invitation to join the Northwest Development Project as a senior researcher. Your skill is beyond impressive. Emily accepted it quietly. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't look for Ryan as she left. He didn't try to stop her. Rumors moved through the academy like wildfire. At first they were hushed, just whispers in the corners of offices, subtle glances in the mess hall. But by the end of the week, everyone knew what had happened at the conference. Captain Ryan Carter's report, once hailed as a work of genius, was now the subject of scrutiny, suspicion, and something worse, ridicule. Did you hear he plagiarized a civilian's work? Lane? You mean that rich girl with the engineering degree? No wonder she stayed so calm, she knew what she was doing. Ryan heard them. Every word. He walked through the halls with clenched fists and a tightened jaw. The same people who once clapped him on the back now lowered their voices as he passed. Cadets he had trained refused to meet his eyes. Officers who'd once asked his opinion now found excuses to be somewhere else. He had spent years crafting a reputation. One misstep and it was collapsing around him. What burned more than the humiliation was the knowledge that Emily had done it so effortlessly. She had walked into that room, taken back what was hers, and walked out even stronger than before. She hadn't needed revenge. She didn't argue or accuse. She simply was. Unshakable. Nora Johnson hadn't spoken to him since the day of the conference. She had sat far from him during the debriefing. Every time he tried to approach her, she turned cold and polite. That day he found her in the Academy Gardens, reading a thick Soviet engineering journal. She looked up as he approached but didn't offer a smile. Nora, he began, about the conference. I don't want to talk about it, Ryan. You think I stole her work? Nora's expression didn't change. I know you did. His stomach dropped. She closed her book. I saw the original formula on Emily's desk. I even helped her fix the error she was struggling with. There's no way you could have produced that same derivation unless you had access to her notes. You think I'd stoop that low? Nora stood up slowly. I think you already did. Then she added, voice sharper than he'd ever heard. My father always said ambition without integrity leads to ruin. I see what he meant now. Ryan reached out, trying to catch her arm. Wait. Don't touch me. Her voice was icy. Then more softly, Captain Shane has been nothing but respectful. Steady. He's a man my father can trust. Ryan's throat went dry. Nora's eyes flicked over him, disappointment etched in every line. You and I, we never even had a real relationship. Let's not pretend otherwise. And just like that she walked away. Emily received her official transfer papers 2 days later. She would be leaving for the Northwest within the week. The house was quiet that night. She sat by her desk, sorting through the last of her reports. Stacked folders of notes, engineering sketches, and chemical breakdowns sat ready for shipping. A knock at her door pulled her from her work. It was Nora. She wore a beige coat and carried a small paper-wrapped bundle. Don't worry, Nora said with a light smile. I'm not here to lecture you. Emily opened the door and stepped aside. Come in. Nora placed the package on the desk and Saturday. It's a book of equations from Moscow. Might help with your new project. Emily smiled faintly. Thank you. I wanted to say goodbye, Nora said after a moment. And thank you for what you said at the clinic about marriage. Emily tilted her head. You and Shane. Nora nodded. Her eyes shone with something deep, settled. We're getting engaged next month. That's good, Emily said softly. He's a good man. Nora hesitated. I have to ask, was there ever anything real between you and Ryan? Emily looked out the window. In the last life I thought so, she said quietly. I spent decades believing it. Nora's brows furrowed, confused. Emily turned back to her. Let's just say I've had more time than most to understand how love can look a lot like duty when you want it badly enough. There was a long silence between them. Then Nora reached out, placing her hand gently on Emily's. You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. I hope you know that. Emily nodded once, her throat thick with gratitude. 2 nights before she was due to leave, Ryan showed up at the clinic again. He didn't bring Nora. He didn't bring flowers. He brought anger. Emily had just finished sorting supplies when his voice broke through the silence. You humiliated me. She didn't turn. No. You did that all on your own. I built that report from scratch. She slowly turned around, arms crossed. Using a draft you found in my old files. You edited it. Refined it. But it wasn't yours. Ryan stepped closer, his voice low. Do you think this makes you noble? You went behind my back. You went behind mine 10 years ago, Emily said evenly. I just didn't see it back then. His hands curled into fists. I gave everything up for you once. I could have been someone important. And I gave up myself, Emily said. I followed you to that forgotten island, Ryan. I gave you children. A home. My whole future. You used my research and smiled while I faded. His eyes dropped. She softened. You could have apologized. You could have said, Emily, I'm sorry. I panicked. I didn't think you'd submit that paper. But instead you stood on a stage and smiled while people called you brilliant. He said nothing. I'm not angry, she added. I'm free. That word hung in the air between them like smoke. Ryan looked at her one last time. Will we really never? He stopped. Then bitterly, you've made up your mind. Yes, Emily said. This time I choose me. The train to the northwest left at dawn. Emily stood on the platform with one suitcase, a stack of research folders, and a heart lighter than it had felt in decades. As the steam hissed and the whistle blew, she stepped aboard and didn't look back. The mountains waited. The future waited. And for the first time in 2 lives, Emily Lane walked forward without hesitation. The Northwest Research Center wasn't what Emily expected. She had imagined industrial grandeur, massive steel structures and echoing laboratories. Instead, the compound was a sprawl of gray buildings carved into a windswept plateau, blanketed by snow for much of the year. The air was dry, crisp and sharp as glass. Just breathing it made her feel awake. It was cold, colder than she remembered, but invigorating. She had arrived. Her dormitory was modest. A single cot, a desk bolted to the wall, a radiator that sputtered like an old man with a cough. But the windows faced the sunrise, and every morning the mountains lit up with fire. She hadn't seen this kind of beauty in either of her lives. Her heart whispered, "This is where I was always meant to be." The work began immediately. She was assigned to Unit C, focused on large-scale chemical refinement methods for energy production. The head of her unit, Dr. Marcus Halloway, was a stiff, bespectacled man with zero tolerance for sloppiness and even less for nepotism. "I don't care who your father is," he said during their first meeting. "We don't hire names here. We hire minds." Emily had smiled. "That's good. Because I brought mine with me." Within a week she had rewritten 2 of the team's older catalyst models, spotting efficiency losses they hadn't noticed in years. Within a month she was leading most of the derivation presentations and fielding questions from military advisors visiting the site. She had expected resentment. Instead she earned respect. Still, not everything went smoothly. Late one afternoon, while running a stress simulation on pipeline seals, Emily noticed someone hovering near her desk. He wore a uniform but lacked the usual stiffness of officers. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing calloused hands. He had kind eyes and a perpetually amused smile. "Captain Shane," he said, offering a hand. Logistics and systems coordination. I think we may have some overlap. Emily shook it. Emily Lane. Unit C. I know, he said. Everyone knows. She narrowed her eyes. That's not always a good thing. I disagree, he said with a shrug. People here are used to loud voices and louder egos. You don't come across like either. Emily arched a brow. I've had a lot of practice hiding both. He grinned. Well, if you ever want to blow off some steam, we're short a chess player in the officers' rec hall. I don't play chess, she lied. Then I like my chances. Over the following weeks, Emily found herself crossing paths with Shane often. At first it was purely logistical. He helped streamline her equipment requests, rerouted supply shipments for her unit, and even caught an error in her backup power model that could have caused a 3-day delay. But gradually the interactions bled into something softer. He brought her coffee during all-nighters. She teased him for constantly forgetting to label his reports. He listened when she vented about department politics, never interrupting, just listening. He didn't flirt. He simply showed up. Was unfamiliar, comfortable, and quietly dangerous. One evening, Emily returned to her dorm to find a package on her desk. Inside was a well-worn textbook with a folded note. Heard you're revising the heat transfer model. Thought this might help. She ran her fingers along the spine of the book. She had read this exact volume in her first life, but never owned it. Ryan had said it was too technical, and she'd agreed at the time, letting it go. But now she devoured every page. News from the capital came in slow waves, but one letter in particular arrived that left Emily stunned. It was from Nora. Dear Emily, I hope the mountains aren't freezing you alive. Shane says you're too stubborn to wear a proper coat. I believe him. The engagement went through. My father gave his blessing. I wanted to tell you that Ryan has been officially suspended from duty. An investigation uncovered multiple irregularities. Your situation wasn't the only one. I know closure isn't a thing that comes with paperwork, but I thought you'd want to know. P.S. Thank you for showing me that strength doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. With love, Nora. Emily read the letter twice. Then she folded it and placed it in her drawer. She didn't feel triumphant. Only still. Her work continued and one breakthrough followed another. She pioneered a hybrid catalyst method that could reduce sulfur emissions by 40%, an advancement that stunned even her most skeptical colleagues. Her paper was submitted to the National Board within weeks. The director of the center, an aging professor named Lou, pulled her aside after the review. I would have bet 100 rations you wouldn't last here, he admitted, tapping her paper. Too polite. Too composed. But this changes things. She inclined her head. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, he said. The ministry wants a delegate for the international exchange program in Berlin. I'm putting your name in. Emily blinked. But I'm just a junior researcher. Not anymore. That night she stood at the edge of the plateau just outside the center's perimeter, the wind tugging at her scarf. Stars glittered above like powdered silver, and in the distance wolves howled their ancient songs. Shane approached, hands in his coat pockets. Should have brought a better scarf, he said. I like this one. Of course you do, he said, stepping beside her. Stubborn. She glanced at him sideways. What are you doing out here? He looked up at the stars. Just thinking. About how some people fall so hard and some just rise. She didn't ask what he meant. He looked at her then, and the silence between them grew heavy with meaning. I heard about the Berlin offer, he said. She nodded. It's not final. But if it were, he said, you'd go. I would. There was no hesitation in her voice. He smiled. Good. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he said softly, You know, Nora once told me something. She said you'd never look back once you found your feet again. Emily turned fully to him, her breath fogging in the cold. She was right. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, You don't owe anyone an explanation, Emily. But if you ever want to stop running, you know where to find me. She looked down at the snow. Her heart was calm. Not racing. Not afraid. I'm not running, she said. Not anymore. He nodded. Then I guess I'll see you around. And with that he walked back into the night. Berlin in winter was all steel and steam. The city buzzed with reconstruction, buildings rising from old bones, concrete layered over war-scarred memories. The exchange conference was held in the industrial quarter, where engineers from across the globe gathered under a massive vaulted ceiling, its steel beams strung with rows of international flags. Emily stood alone near the back of the hall, her name badge clipped to her coat, a rolled copy of her research tucked under her arm. The moment she stepped through the doors, the air felt different. She wasn't someone's wife here. She wasn't her father's daughter. She wasn't the girl they whispered about behind the curtains at social mixers. She was a researcher. A problem solver. A mind. And they knew it. Her presentation came on the second day. Emily stood before an audience of scholars, diplomats, and military representatives from over a dozen countries. The topic: hybrid catalyst efficiency under resource-scarce conditions. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't revolutionary. But it was hers. When she stepped up to the lectern, there was a pause, just long enough to recall the sharp laughter from a lifetime ago, the moment Ryan Carter handed sunflowers to someone else, the way her voice used to tremble in rooms like this. Not anymore. Her fingers were steady as she adjusted the microphone. Her voice was clear. Each word, each calculation flowed with ease. She punctuated key results with charts, cited revised Soviet reactor experiments, and used real-world data from her work in the Northwest. The applause at the end wasn't thunderous. It was respectful, professional, sincere. And that meant more to her than any standing ovation. Afterward, she was approached by a group of delegates from the UK and France, followed by an American energy consultant. Everyone wanted to talk about potential collaboration. Among them stood one woman with sharp features and silver blonde hair, Professor Ingrid Drexler, the German chair of the Continental Engineering Society. "You speak of your hybrid model with such precision," Professor Drexler said. "But I noticed an earlier draft of your work was almost identical to a report submitted from the Westbridge Military Academy." Emily didn't flinch. "That was an unauthorized derivative of my original research. Submitted without credit. I proved authorship last autumn during a national review." Drexler raised a brow. "Oh, you're that Emily Lane." Emily smiled politely. "I suppose I am." "Impressive," the professor said, nodding. "Many women here struggle to claim space. You've carved out your own." "Not carved," Emily said softly. "Reclaimed." Later that evening, as she walked through the hotel's icy garden path, she spotted a familiar figure by the courtyard fountain. Ryan Carter. For a brief second the world narrowed. Her breath caught. He wore civilian clothes now. No uniform. No medals. He looked thinner, older, despite only a year's difference. His eyes were sharp with something between recognition and resentment. "Emily," he said. She didn't stop walking. "Ryan." He stepped forward. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Clearly." "I heard about the Berlin delegation," he said. "And the award nomination. Congratulations." "Thank you." He stood there awkwardly, then added, "I've been reassigned. Temporarily. Liaison for foreign tech audits. Mostly paperwork." Emily didn't reply. "I miss the field," he said after a moment. "But things change." "They do," she thought. "And some people never do." "I didn't come to talk about the past," he added quickly. "I just wanted to ask one thing." She waited. "Did you ever really love me?" he asked. Emily looked up, snow settling in her lashes. Her gaze was steady. "Yes, I did. But I also mistook your attention for affection. Your obligation for loyalty. And your ambition for love." He looked away. She continued, her voice softer. "I don't regret what we had. I regret losing myself in it." Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but she was already walking away. Some conversations didn't need closure. Some stories ended long before the last page turned. The next morning, Emily received a letter slid under her door. It wasn't signed. "Your work deserves the world stage, not backroom sabotage. But beware. Not everyone who smiles in public is harmless in private." He's not done trying. Enclosed was a carbon copy of a submission, her submission with slight modifications dated yesterday. The name on the paper was R.C. Ryan Carter. Emily's jaw locked. He'd done it again. Even now, stripped of rank, floundering in disgrace, he was still trying to climb using her. But this time she had a voice. She went directly to the German organizing committee. She brought proof, notes, drafts, diagrams with her initials, time-stamped work logs from the Northwest. The officials examined the documents in silence. Professor Drexler was among them. After reviewing the materials, she set the offending copy on the table. "This," she said with clipped finality, "is theft." Emily exhaled. They voided his submission within hours. No formal charges. Diplomatic politics made it difficult. But Ryan was removed from all panels and escorted off-site by security. That night, Berlin's skyline glowed in quiet blue haze as Emily stood on the balcony of the banquet hall. A junior engineer from Warsaw approached her hesitantly. "Mississippi Lane," he said. "They just announced the top contributor recognition. It's you." Her throat tightened. She looked toward the podium where her name had just been read aloud, Emily Grace Lane, for excellence in industrial innovation and technical advancement. No borrowed title. No shared credit. Just her. She walked to the stage, applause echoing behind her like a heartbeat. When she returned to her room that night, there was a telegram waiting. From Shane. "Heard the news. They finally figured out what I already knew. The world's lucky to have you. Just don't forget we miss you back here." She smiled to herself. For the first time, Emily Lane didn't wonder what came next. She didn't doubt her footing or question her choices. She knew exactly who she was. And for the first time in 2 lives, that was enough. Emily Lane returned home to snow-covered tracks and quiet stairs. The train from Berlin dropped her back in the capital just as early spring began to thaw the air, but the warmth hadn't reached society's frozen edges. Though the international press had praised her contributions, and the Northwest Center had doubled her project funding, whispers in local elite circles clung like old perfume, faint, cloying, and impossible to shake. Some people still called her the capitalist heiress. Others the fallen debutante. But more now called her by a new name, Engineer Lane. And that made all the difference. She hadn't planned to stay long. Her stop in the capital was brief, just long enough to attend a board meeting at the Ministry of Industry and finalize her new research grants. Still, when her mother sent a note asking her to come home for dinner, Emily didn't refuse. The Lane household hadn't changed. The same chandelier, the same silent butler, the same crystal glasses and conversation about foreign policy over roast duck. Her father still read the financial section of the paper at the table, her mother still corrected the placement of forks, and her Aunt Meredith still eyed her like an unsolved equation. "You've grown," Aunt Meredith said finally, slicing into her fish. "You walk like you don't need anyone." "I don't," Emily replied pleasantly. Her mother tried to laugh, but it sounded strained. Her father, to his credit, smiled. "I read about Berlin. That German professor said you redefined catalytic theory." Emily gave a polite nod. "It was a team effort." "Don't do that," her father said. "Don't downplay it. You earned your name back." She met his eyes, surprised. There was pride there. Real pride. For once, her family saw her not as a girl who broke tradition, but as a woman who reshaped her future. It felt good. But it didn't last. 2 days later, while reviewing documents at the ministry, she received an urgent note from the Northwest Research Center. "Sensitive internal information has been leaked to an international industrial firm. We believe a former associate may have duplicated portions of your Berlin presentation and sold them. Your presence is requested immediately." Emily stared at the paper. Former associate. There was only one person who fit that description, and enough arrogance to attempt it again. Back at the research center, the mood was different. Colleagues who had once clapped her on the back now averted their eyes. Her lab, usually humming with energy, was quiet. A sense of suspicion hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Holloway met her at the entrance. "We've launched an internal review," he said without preamble. "But the material leaked matches portions of your catalyst formula." Emily's heart pounded. "My reports are logged. Time-stamped. Track. That data was secure." "Then someone else used it," Holloway said. "The leak came from within your team. And because your name's on the original documents, some are questioning whether you knew." "Are you accusing me?" "No," he said. "But others might." Emily exhaled. "What can I do?" "Prove it wasn't you. We've suspended all other suspects. But until this is resolved, your position is under review." She spent the next 3 days reviewing lab logs, login records, facility keycards. She traced paper trails, flagged inconsistencies, followed ink smudges and missing signatures. And at the end of the 3rd day the answer emerged, hidden in a misfiled delivery manifest. The keycards used to access her documents had been cloned. By someone who had authorization weeks earlier. Someone she hadn't thought about in months. Nora Johnson. The betrayal didn't make sense at first. Emily remembered Nora's warm goodbye, the way she'd shared notes, the way they'd spoken like sisters before Emily left for Berlin. But as she dug further, the picture darkened. Nora had been engaged to Shane, yes, but her family, despite appearances, had suffered financial instability. Rumor had it her father had refused to back a trade deal that would have favored a private chemical conglomerate. Shortly after, Nora began corresponding with an industrial firm in Belgium under a pseudonym. No. That firm had leaked a product based on Emily's research. Weeks after Nora's visit, the final piece fell into place. The book Nora had gifted before Emily's departure had gone missing from her dorm. Emily had trusted her. She had believed in her. She'd let her guard down. But Emily didn't rage. She didn't shout or storm into rooms demanding answers. She gathered proof. She built her case like a blueprint, carefully, methodically. And when she had it, she submitted everything to the ministry herself. The hearing was swift. Nora denied nothing. Her eyes, once so bright with intelligence, were hollow as she sat in silence. Her father stood behind her, stunned. Shane didn't attend at all. The panel voted unanimously. Nora's license would be revoked. She would be barred from industrial and academic work indefinitely. As the room emptied, Nora looked up once at Emily. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said softly. Emily met her gaze. "We all choose our paths, Nora. You chose yours." Nora's eyes welled with tears. Emily didn't stay to watch them fall. The scandal cleared her name again, but this time the victory felt heavier. Not because she doubted herself, but because she realized the cost of giving too much trust, even to those who seemed to walk the same road. She returned to her lab. Her work resumed. Her team restored faith in her. But something had shifted. One evening, as she ran test simulations late into the night, a knock sounded at the door. Shane. He looked tired. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "I didn't know what Nora was doing. I should have seen it." Emily nodded. "We both trusted her." He stepped into the room. "It's over between us. It's been over for a while, honestly. I just didn't want to believe it." "I know," Emily said. They stood in silence for a while, surrounded by blueprints and lab beakers, years of data hanging like ghosts between them. "I don't want to assume anything," Shane said finally. "But I still want to be part of your life. If you'll let me." Emily looked at him, not with the blind affection of a girl who needed rescue, but with the steady gaze of a woman who had saved herself. "I don't need you," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "But maybe that's why it could work." She let out a breath and for the first time in weeks smiled. Spring arrived in the Northwest late, reluctant and slow, as if it had to fight its way through the last crusts of snow and biting wind. But when it came in color. Pale green buds along the foothills. Melted frost gushing down gullies. And, inside the research center, a flurry of administrative changes. The first shock came during a routine meeting. Emily arrived early, expecting to discuss minor adjustments to the geothermal extraction project. Instead, she was greeted by senior directors, two unfamiliar men from the Capital Commission, and the unmistakable rustle of sealed documents. "Mississippi Lane," began Dr. Halloway, his tone unreadable. "The ministry has nominated you to lead the National Catalyst Reform Initiative." Emily's breath hitched. "That program spans 6 facilities," she said cautiously. "It reports directly to the ministry's innovation office. It's national scale." "And they want you," said one of the officials. "Not just as a researcher. As chief project architect." Her mind buzzed. That role wasn't just a promotion, it was visibility, power, influence. The kind of position that shaped industry policy for the next decade. It had never been offered to someone her age. And never, to a woman. She glanced at Halloway, expecting hesitation or resentment. But he only nodded. "You've earned it." The announcement went public that afternoon. It didn't take long for the press to stir. Capitalist heiress appointed to state engineering post. Is Emily Lane a genius or just well-connected? Reputation over results? A rising star with a scandal-ridden past. They brought up everything: her family name, the plagiarism rumors, Ryan Carter's downfall, even Nora's betrayal. None of them talked about her papers. Her data. The field breakthroughs that had her name on every journal for the past 6 months. The day after the headlines, her office filled with silence. Some colleagues avoided her entirely. A few whispered louder than necessary. He expected it. But it still stung. People are afraid of what doesn't fit, Shane told her over lunch in the rec room that week. A woman who can build reactors and doesn't ask for permission? You might as well have grown horns. She sipped her coffee. What do I do? He grinned. Remind them why they're afraid of you. Emily threw herself into the project. She made trips across regions, meeting engineers at coastal ports, mining experts in desert towns, rural developers who'd never had government support before. She cut through layers of bureaucratic sludge, streamlined approvals, and developed a universal framework for safer industrial transitions. Each time her proposals passed, her critics fell a little quieter. But the louder she succeeded, the more public the backlash became. An anonymous article titled, "The Hidden Hands of Mississippi Lane," appeared in an influential state paper. It accused her of exploiting the Ryan Carter scandal for personal advancement. Someone had leaked her private correspondence with the review board. Her name trended on military forums, framed as a cunning manipulator. The article ended with, "This is not the story of a brilliant woman, but a woman who learned how to play the game and pretends not to be playing at all." Emily sat in her office long after everyone else had left, the paper open before her, cold tea at her elbow. She hadn't cried. Not even once. But a dull ache settled in her chest like wet stone. How many times could she rise only to be torn down again? She closed her eyes. And remembered the island. The winters when the roof leaked and Ryan held her close, silently blaming himself. The warmth of their children's small fingers. The nights she stayed up sketching turbine designs by candlelight, dreaming of a future she never reached. She had lived quietly once. And she had died quietly. But this life? This one wasn't meant to be silent. 2 weeks later, she was scheduled to speak at the National Symposium for Infrastructure Advancement. The event was high-profile. International press, military brass, industrial tycoons. Her advisors begged her to revise her speech. Avoid personal anecdotes. Keep it sterile and safe. She didn't listen. On the day of the symposium, she stepped onto the stage wearing a navy blue suit and no apologies. "I've been called many things," she began. "A debutante. A manipulator. Thief. A token." There was a murmur in the crowd. "But here's what I've actually done. I've restructured regional catalyst systems to reduce emission by 40%. I've authored 9 technical papers across 3 disciplines. I've advised 5 facilities, none of which failed inspection." She took a step forward. "I've also been underestimated, misquoted, plagiarized, and used as a shield for someone else's ambition. In my first life, my first career, I gave up everything for love. For someone else's dreams. Pause. But in this life I remembered who I am. And I'm not sorry." Silence. Then thunderous applause. Even the defense minister stood. After the speech, the tide turned. Fast. Requests for interviews came in from outlets that had once trashed her. The leaked article was retracted quietly, replaced by profiles titled things like "Emily Lane, Brilliance with Backbone," and "The Woman Redrawing the Blueprint." The ministry reappointed her to an expanded role, adding oversight of international innovation exchange. One morning she arrived at her office to find a bouquet of sunflowers on her desk. Her fingers hesitated over the note. From someone who's finally starting to catch up. She smiled. That evening she took a long walk along the plateau. The stars had returned in full splendor, scattered across the sky like sparks waiting to ignite. Shane found her there as he often did. "I got offered a post in the capital," he said. "Chief Operations for Industrial Reform." Emily raised a brow. "Congratulations. They want me to recommend a deputy." "Is this a pitch?" she teased. "No," he said seriously. "I won't ask you to follow me. You've come too far for that. She looked at him surprised. I just want to know, he added, whether you want to walk beside me. Wherever the road goes. For a long time she said nothing. Then, I used to think choosing love meant giving up part of yourself. Now I know when it's real, it adds to who you are. He stepped closer. She didn't move away. I'm not running anymore, Shane, she said quietly. I know, he said. That's why I'm staying still. The invitation came by telegram. A ceremonial banquet in the capital, hosted by the Ministry of Industry, attended by global delegates and themed Visions of a New Era. They wanted Emily Lane to speak as the closing voice of the evening. Not because she was a symbol, but because she had become something more. An authority. A name spoken not with irony but with respect. And perhaps most importantly, because she no longer needed their approval. She stood backstage, reviewing her notes by the quiet glow of a single overhead bulb. A steward offered her water. Another handed her a revised program. Her speech was last. Before her was an awards ceremony recognizing civilian contributors to national innovation. One name in the lineup stopped her cold. Ryan Carter. She blinked. According to the program, Ryan had been reinstated at a lower advisory level in the Ministry of Technology. Since then he had contributed to a minor logistics system used in remote resource centers. The award was ceremonial, a token of rehabilitation, not prestige. Still, the thought of him sharing the stage with her on this final chapter of her rebirth felt almost poetic. When he stepped on stage he looked older. Not broken, not bitter. Just tired. He accepted the certificate, shook hands, said the right words. He did not glance toward the wings where Emily stood waiting. He knew she was there. That was enough. And then her name was called. She walked onto the stage to the hush of hundreds. No longer an outsider. No longer a whisper in someone else's story. She was the headline now. I'm not who I used to be, she began. And in some ways I never was. He paused, allowing the words to settle. For years I thought that loving someone meant becoming smaller. That to be chosen I had to be quiet. Accept less. Give more. I believed I could change the world from behind someone else's shadow. Her voice did not shake. I was wrong. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Engineering is not just machines. It's systems. Decisions. People. And when we build better foundations, when we put the right people in the room, everything changes. She looked toward the audience. I won't apologize for being ambitious. For being brilliant. For refusing to fade when someone told me I should. Applause rose, not loud, not wild. Just steady. Genuine. I used to live in the past, she finished. Now I live in the future. Afterward, as the hall slowly emptied, a familiar figure approached her by the marble pillars. Ryan. His hands were in his pockets. His expression unreadable. Quite the ending, he said. Emily smiled. It's not the ending. Just a turning point. He nodded, glancing around. You really did it. I did. Another pause. I once said I'd choose you again, he murmured. I meant it. I know, she said. And once I would have believed that was enough. He looked at her then, something fragile in his eyes. But I've changed, she continued. And I don't want someone to choose me. I want someone to stand with me. Ryan didn't argue. Because he couldn't. She wasn't angry anymore. She didn't hate him. He simply had outgrown him. That was the quiet tragedy of his life. And the triumph of hers. Months passed. Emily didn't return to the Northwest. Not right away. She accepted the position in the capital instead, Director of Cross-Innovation Projects. Her teams operated across sectors. Energy, education, infrastructure, research. She wasn't a name behind a door anymore. She was the door. And she kept it open. For women. For working-class scholars. For quiet geniuses who never fit in boardrooms. For people like the girl she used to be. One spring afternoon she received a package in the mail. A notebook. Filled with neat diagrams. Precise math. Notes in tight handwriting. It had no name. Just an address. A small university in a rural province. And a simple message clipped to the cover. I read about you. I didn't know someone like me could dream like this. She smiled. That was the kind of legacy she wanted to leave. Not statues. Not medals. Permission. She still thought of Shane sometimes. They had kept in touch, slow, natural, steady. His work took him to border facilities, where he implemented systems she'd helped design. Sometimes they wrote late into the night. Sometimes they didn't. There was no pressure. Just presence. And someday maybe more. Years later, a new exhibit opened in the National Museum, Minds That Moved the Nation. Among the profiles, engineers, inventors, leaders, was a single line etched in bronze beneath her name. She lived twice. But only the second time was truly hers. Emily stood before it in silence. Then she turned, walked back into the light and kept moving forward. The end.